911, what is your emergency?
We need help in Gates. There's a fire coming up in the neighborhood. It's huge. Oh my God, it's so bad out here.
5 years ago, for some Oregon residents, the world burned down.
Driven by gusting winds, the Santiam fire rushed down the canyon, enveloping town after town along Highway 22.
We got brush fires going, lines down, and a structure fire.
A severe windstorm and dry conditions saw out-of-control fires explode around the state on September 7th and 8th in 2020, raging through communities like Gates, Detroit, and Otis in Northwest Oregon, like Talent and Phoenix in Southern Oregon.
In Oregon, more than 650 homes have burned. In some places, entire communities have been wiped out.
The fire on both sides was so hot, I thought my car was going to melt.
What became known as the Labor Day fires burned up more than 4,000 homes and more than 1 million acres of land in Oregon, making 2020 the state's most destructive wildfire season on record. People died. And for fire survivors, something else died too. Home, memories, stability, their lives as they knew them before.
The Alameda fire started near Ashland on Tuesday morning and was pushed by the wind through the communities of Talent and Phoenix. Evacuations are in place.
Dark smoke coming in and seeing houses burning and hearing houses blow up from the...
One man I met said he watched the fire roaring towards his property like a giant lava flow, and he said it felt like he was actually in hell.
So what do you do when a catastrophe strikes? When your community turns to ash? When you lose things that made you who you are? What do you do next? From the Gert Boyle Studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Today on the show, recovering from some of the worst fires in Oregon history in a home changed forever. How do people recover from a disaster? What do they need? What makes things harder or easier? How do they help each other? What about the land itself? How does the earth recover from fire? And what does fire recovery even mean? Do we ever really recover from something like that? We'll explore with two OPB reporters who were there in 2020 and in the long years since.
Yeah, we started getting those just incessant reports of fires, evacuations.
This is my coworker, Cassandra Perfida.
My editor at the time sent me down to see if I could find some people who were evacuating, find some people who were fleeing their homes as these fires burned through these towns in the Santiam Canyon.
Cassandra is a reporter and producer with OPB's Science and Environment team. She often works on longer-term projects like documentaries for our TV show Oregon Field Guide. So covering a quickly developing breaking news story like these fires was a big deal for her.
And as I drove, of course, it's like the sky was getting darker and more red as I got closer to where the fires were burning. And so it was a very ominous feeling.
About 230 miles south, April Ehrlich had a similar feeling.
Yeah, I remember my husband stepping outside and looking up at the sky and being like, whoa, that looks ominous.
April is also my coworker at OPB. She covers lands and environmental policies for our climate team. But in 2020, she was living in Talent and reporting for our news partner, Jefferson Public Radio.
And I went out to him and I looked up and there was this huge plume of smoke in the sky. And I was like, okay, that's a fire. I'm going to go report on it. I've been reporting on wildfires for the first time. Here is one in my backyard.
She didn't start reporting on the Alameda fire just yet. First, she had to evacuate from her own home, as she told us last year on our episode about disaster preparedness and building an emergency kit. She made it through traffic to a friend's house in a different town, and before long, she was back on the job, talking to evacuees at a shelter in Central Point. To her north, in Staten, Cassandra found herself in a Safeway.
A couple people did, stop and were gracious enough to talk with me and tell me that, oh yeah, I'm on my way out. I forgot the dog food, but I'm leaving my house. I forgot a bunch of stuff.
One of them was Verlin Arney, who'd forgotten his watch and driver's license, but had tried to protect his home in Mill City before he left.
And all of our houses there, before we left, we have sprinklers up on our roofs, sprinkling right now.
He didn't yet know the fate of his home. Cassandra also remembers going to meet another man who wanted to talk to OPB.
I was driving past houses that were engulfed in flames, which just didn't feel right or safe, but there was no one around, right? There were no fire trucks. It was like the fire trucks must have been dealing with some other bigger, more important fires because there were so many of them. And I met with this man, and he took me down his street to where his childhood home was just burning to the ground with no one even attempting to put out the flames. And it was just a really eye-opening moment for me as a person to realize that sometimes disasters like this are so bad that you can't really count on help coming for you. That you've got to figure out, what are you going to do to help yourself?
In Southern Oregon, at that evacuation center in Central Point, the people April met included a group from the same mobile home park in Talent. A lot of people affected by the Labor Day fires there were low-income folks, mobile home residents. Latinos were also hit hard. And one thing April's learned in the aftermath of fires is that your level of access to information or resources often depends on things like your socioeconomic background, or age, or the language you speak.
Being connected to the network of knowledge after a wildfire, how to get resources, where to go, how to fight for getting disaster aid, because that's something you have to do, how to fight with insurance companies to get claims reimbursed. We have these knowledge bases that many of us may take for granted because we are involved in those. Like you and I are both journalists, so we know how to go to city council meetings. We know how to connect with our city councilors, but not everybody is as connected to that world as we are, especially marginalized communities, people who speak English as a second language. And so when there are things like town halls, or if there is a resource event, that may not reach those folks. And the same thing goes for evacuation notices.
April did a big investigation with NPR about FEMA disaster aid after the 2020 fires in Oregon. It found that most claims were denied, around 70%, even after accounting for fraudulent claims. Navigating the complex bureaucracy of appeals and paperwork and different aid options can be extremely confusing for people, like Maria Ledesma Gonzalez, who primarily speaks Spanish and lost her mobile home in Phoenix. She said through an interpreter that she asked FEMA for help with her new, much higher rent.
I sent them papers and sent them more papers.
She didn't have insurance, so she should have been eligible. But FEMA wouldn't help because she didn't have the documentation they wanted to prove to them that she pays rent.
Because they want receipts for me paying the rent. But I don't pay the rent with a check. I pay the rent in cash, and they want receipts.
Another person April met, Jose Macias, lost his home in Phoenix, too. FEMA representatives he spoke to said he wasn't eligible for FEMA aid because he had insurance. They should have told him about his eligibility for a different loan from the Small Business Administration, but no one did, so he didn't know about it until it was too late to apply.
Do you think if you knew that you could take additional steps to potentially get assistance, would you have done it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why not? Because anything can help.
April says people often don't have all the information they need to go through this process or don't know that they can appeal.
It looks like the tactic that these agencies are taking is just deny. And if somebody appeals, then go back and take a closer look. And that is why it's important people know that they can appeal these denials and they can fight for that. But that's something that not a lot of people know. And it's also incredibly difficult to do if you are dealing with trauma after losing your home to a fire, if you are working multiple jobs to be able to afford a place in a place where housing costs are really high. There's just so many things that people are already dealing with. To force them to go through this bureaucratic process in order to get some aid is really difficult for people to deal with.
I can imagine how easy it is to feel like defeated by this process.
Especially if you've already lived a lifetime of working in a world where you have historically been marginalized, right? Why even try if you've already had experience being denied? This is not a welcoming environment for people, and it's easier for them mentally to just disengage.
Cassandra says relief workers told her that even for people who got insurance payouts, it rarely covered everything they needed to rebuild. The financial stress over time takes a physical toll on people.
While people years later had places to live, they had endured so much stress that many of them were getting sick. Some of them died years after the fires. And while no one could say, oh, yes, like this person died because of the fire, the people who knew them the best, the people who loved them, understood that this person likely would not have gotten sick and died had they not lost their house in this fire. So those kinds of intangible consequences of the fire, I think, started to become more clear as the years passed.
There's obviously a heavy emotional toll as well. As April found, school-aged kids who were just beginning to grapple with the pandemic were especially hard hit.
Kids were already having to deal with having to figure out how to do school from home. You know, just having a strong internet connection and, showing up on time, having a place to do schoolwork. That was all stuff they were trying to figure out. And then the fires destroyed their homes. And now they are living in hotels, maybe not having a strong Wi-Fi connection or dealing with the trauma of having lost everything.
A family of April's neighbors lost their home. She remembers being impressed by the mom, Courtney Bucolo's spreadsheet system for cataloging the items in their home for their insurance company. Her 5-year-old daughter, Abby, was already struggling with the pandemic, but she started having a really hard time after the fire when they were living in a bed and breakfast.
She was complaining about stomachache, but it kept escalating to the point where she was screaming and doubling over every couple of minutes.
Her mom took her to the hospital, where Abby curled into the fetal position and didn't talk to anyone. She started screaming again and then passed out. But doctors said tests they ran came up clear.
And then they were like, we think it's a panic attack.
Fire loss is traumatic for fire survivors of any age, April says.
I think anybody who has gone through grief knows that it never goes away. It just becomes part of you. And losing everything in a fire, whether it was your house or your sense of community or your sense of stability, is grief. It gives you grief. They're not just things, there are homes, there are memories, and they are things that are, in some ways tied to our identities.
She says she thinks a lot about one woman who told her that sometimes things she used to have in her house just randomly pop into her head.
Her favorite mug or her houseplant. And then she imagines what it looked like when it burned. And I think that is such a dark thing to experience. I think about it sometimes too. I look at some of my stuff and I think, what would it look like if it burned in a fire?
It is dark. All of this is so, so heavy. But mixed in with the trauma and the loss has been some regrowth. Coming up after a break, we'll meet a plaintiff in a lawsuit related to the fires who's excited to finally move into a new house. And we'll look to communities coming together and the forest itself for lessons about healing. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you like this episode, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll bring you a new story about what it's like to live here every Monday morning. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. That's Jen with 2 N's, and I'll keep you posted on what Team Evergreen is up to. And remember, this episode about what it means to recover from a fire, more of our coverage of the Labor Day fires 5 years later, and all the great OPB reporting and storytelling you hear on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. It really means a lot to us after Congress cut federal funding for public media organizations like OPB. You are our community, and you've been coming together for us, and we are so, so grateful for you all. If you haven't yet, support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to the show. Rochelle McMaster lost her mobile home in Otis near the Oregon coast in the Echo Mountain Fire, one of the complex of fires across the state on Labor Day 2020. Rochelle was one of the plaintiffs in a big class action lawsuit that blamed the utility Pacific Power and its parent company Pacific Corp for causing some of those fires. She drove from Lincoln City to Portland to hear the verdict in court in 2023. Here's what she said then.
It was so incredibly emotional to actually realize that they heard us and they believed us and they understood that we wanted Pacific Power held accountable. I actually get to have my house again. I get to go home, and there's no words to explain how wonderful that is to know.
She's been bouncing around in apartments, and now she's about to move into a Habitat for Humanity home near Lincoln City.
It's been a long time coming, but a few weeks ago in August, Rochelle invited April to check out her new home, just a short ways away from the apartment she'd be moving in from.
The apartment complex you passed? That's where I live.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's going to be easy to move your stuff.
She can't move in yet. An issue with the sidewalk around the home has been holding some things up since January.
I'm taking it as it is a very good experience of learning patience.
Even though that work is almost finished, they couldn't go into the house that day, but they could still see it from the outside.
It's gorgeous. I've gotten to go in, and it's beautiful. I'm so excited that we get to move in here soon.
We walked around her house, walked around some big piles of dirt while she pointed to each room and told us about what each room is going to be.
This is technically the dining room, but our living room is tiny, so we're going to flip it around. If you look, you can kind of see in the kitchen. It is huge.
Oh, yeah. It was really just heartwarming to see. She was really excited about this nook in the front of the house that they built for her daughter, her teenage daughter, who really likes to read.
She's so excited. She made the comment when we were first thinking about houses. She's like, I want a reading nook.
Despite the 2023 court verdict, Rochelle hasn't gotten the money she was awarded in damages yet. The road from losing her home in Otis to getting ready to move into this new house has been bumpy. And then, lucky.
You know, she tried to apply for a loan through the Small Business Administration, and she was denied. So she didn't really have any other way to get enough money for another house. But she needed something that could fit both her and her 2 kids.
I believe it was 2 years after the wildfire. I think it was the senior fair. And Habitat had a booth.
They had this special program for fire survivors. She put her name on a list for getting some housing.
It was kind of like a draw. So they would get these houses that were promised to them, and then they would draw for a person. And if you qualified, then you went through the process. And our name got pulled this last November.
Since living in this apartment, it hasn't really felt like home. She doesn't feel like she's at home right now. And a lot of people in the mobile home park who lost their mobile homes also aren't home. They're all bouncing around. So she feels really grateful that she finally has a home.
Rochelle is regaining a sense of home and stability. But April noticed in these years after the fire, she gained something else, too.
When she lived in that mobile home park, she didn't really talk to a lot of people. She kind of kept to herself. But then when the fire happened, it hit her really hard, right? But she found almost a sense of purpose in helping the people who lived in that park who lost their homes. She created a Facebook group where everybody shares resources. And she joined this lawsuit against Pacific Corp. And she rallied a lot of people in the mobile home park to join this lawsuit.
One thing that brings April a bit of comfort in the wake of fires is seeing the way people help each other, whether it be through mutual aid efforts or just neighbor to neighbor.
Every time I've covered a fire, there's always a coming together of people. And it may sound cheesy, but it really does help people see each other as people, and it helps people get to know each other and the people that they live near. And I think maybe that says something about us as a society. Like maybe we should be having these sorts of spaces before disaster strikes. But if there's anything that comes out of disaster, it's always this community building that I think is really cool.
After the fires, Cassandra Perfida found some more unlikely hope in the middle of a forest devastated by the Beachy Creek fire. On Labor Day 2020, it burned through the Opal Creek Wilderness area, a beloved place for so many Oregonians. In 2021, Cassandra and OPB cinematographer Todd Sonfleeth were able to hike in with leaders of the Opal Creek Ancient Forest Center. That's an educational nonprofit that hosts visitors and programs in the historic mining town of Jawbone Flats. Dwayne Canfield was the center's interim executive director then.
This will be the first time that we've hiked in with a special use permit from the Forest Service.
A lot of people have had the experience of going to Opal Creek before the fires when it was just lush and green and beautiful with these blue pools of water. And when we went back there after the fires, it was devastating on one hand because we were literally it was grueling just getting there. All of the trees had fallen down. So much of that forest had just been ravaged by the winds and the fires. And so everything's sort of charred and gray and blackened.
But on the hike into the wilderness, Cassandra noticed something else in the forest.
We went with an ecologist who had a very keen eye for how the forest was recovering.
Fire ecologist Boone Kaufman.
This is interesting. Here's a western red cedar that survived. Here's a little huckleberry that's still alive. Just envision 6 months ago, it was flaming here. It was probably 1,000 degrees at this site. And you can see how much of the forest floor was consumed. Yet so many of the plants survive even those harsh conditions. In a few years, I would envision this area just will be loaded with beautiful white plumes of this bear grass.
He was just delighting every time he saw these little baby trees.
This is nice. You look here real closely. Here's a small little conifer seedling. And look, here's another one. You can tell it's a Douglas fir. It has the little mouse tail. There's the little Douglas fir seedling coming out. So you see that as quickly as the forest is destroyed, the seedlings come right back. It's magnificent, isn't it?
The forest was regrowing itself. It was recovering from the fire. And we saw tons of mushrooms everywhere, right? The mushrooms are eating the decaying wood. And then we heard woodpeckers, right? Because there's bugs eating the wood. And then the woodpeckers get to eat the bugs. And so he was pointing out all of these dimensions of a recovering forest that were so uplifting and helped me to see through the charred remains of the older forest to the future forest that was there.
Eventually, the group reached Jawbone Flats, and something she heard there really stuck with Cassandra, too.
There was some time that we spent with a guy named Augie Gleason, who had lived at Jawbone Flats. We walked around with him. It was his first time back there since the fires, and, he was pulling some of his belongings out of this pile of rubble.
This is my hang drum. This was made out of a propane tank. Here's my rifle.
And at one point, he stopped and he started talking about how, yes, this recovery is going to take a really long time, but I'm glad for that. This forest needed a break.
There's a lot of people that come through here every year. Yes, this is a magical place, and it said, I'm done. You got to get out of here. I need time. I'm happy that it's taking time. It needs to heal. And it's a different kind of way to look at it. And some people might not understand it because they feel that they've lost something, but it's temporary. Everything is temporary.
I did find that to be a comforting thought, that maybe the aftermath of a fire, when everything is different and nothing is what you remembered, maybe that recovery time is valuable. And on some level, maybe we needed it. Maybe we needed to start over and reconceive of how do we live in our communities that are fire prone. As hard as all the hard things are, if we can carry one thing forward, it might be that these fires sort of forced us to stop and reconsider.
Across Oregon, people are reconsidering and rebuilding in a new way.
Only 21 units out of 165 survived in this park, and we decided to move back in here and build back.
In the spring of 2025, OPB's Think Out Loud team went to Southern Oregon. They met Steve Thorpe at his home in Talent.
We felt it was important to come back and try to help this community revive and be resilient. And so that's what we had done. We were among the first 4 of the families to move back in when we came back.
Steve said since their manufactured home park, Mountain View Estates, was destroyed by the fire, only around 25% of the previous residents had moved back. People had to find housing immediately, and some settled in other communities. Some older adults weren't in good enough health to return to independent living. And for people who didn't have insurance or were underinsured at the time of the fire, they couldn't all afford to move back there. But for those who did, and new residents of the rebuilt park, Steve and his neighbors are prioritizing safety. The park is now a nationally recognized fire-wise neighborhood. That means residents there have come together in an organized way to reduce fire risk around their homes.
The codes talked about hardened siding and fire-resistant roof, and all the new units that are coming in have that kind of designation now. And I'm going to show you one other thing underneath this porch. What they're always trying to do is to keep any kind of leaves or any kind of debris going in there. So we got a little bit of mesh on the sides underneath the steps over there.
It's not just about how homes are rebuilt. Steve, who helps lead the Firewise efforts at the park, also helps keep his neighbors informed.
We say to people, if there is a red flag day, then what we need to do is move all that out away from the house, because right now those 2 chairs with those cushions are within, a couple of feet of the house. Be aware of the conditions. And, the other part of what we do with Firewise is to make sure that we have a good alert system. We have an internal alert system within the park. And then we also have the external alert systems that are on cell phones and for people who only have landlines, because this is a 55-plus community. Not everybody is cell phone savvy.
This is that community building and connection that April saw in her former neighborhood in Talent, continuing 5 years later. It's part of what fire recovery is.
You can only do so much to recover from a fire. There's always going to be some scar left behind. Like, I've interviewed people who lived in an area of Jackson County that experienced a fire in 2003 and to this day still talks about it like the biggest event that ever struck them. And people who lived through that fire learned from it and created ways, like systems for being prepared for next time. And so I think for me, recovery looks like not just having the homes rebuilt and the businesses rebuilt, but to have it become part of their history and also become a way that they have changed in some way.
I asked Cassandra what fire recovery means to her, too.
On some level, it can be literal. Just recovering your sense of stability after chaos. Recovering a roof over your head after your home burns to the ground. There are some things, some tangible things, that can be recovered. And then there are these things that you're not going to get back. You're not going to recover them. I think we have to shift into this kind of evolution, right? We evolve into a new life that is scarred by our past experiences. And, a scar can represent a form of recovery too. It's not that you'll ever fully recover from the trauma or be what you used to be, but you evolve into perhaps a stronger person with renewed outlook on how to approach fire. And that may be the best form of recovery that we can hope for, is that we can evolve a new understanding of what it means to live with fire.
Cassandra Perfida and April Ehrlich are both OPB reporters who cover the environment. You can read all their reporting and other stories about the Labor Day fires 5 years later at opb.org. Thank you so much for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast about the place you call home. This episode was produced and engineered by me. Our technical director is Stephen Cray. The OPB podcast team also includes Julie Sabatier, Mia Estrada, Malia Fass, Peter Frick Wright, and Sage Van Wing. April Ehrlich, Cassandra Perfida, Todd Sonfleeth, Dave Miller, and I did the interviews you heard. And a major shout out to our Southern Oregon news partners, Jefferson Public Radio, where April reported stories that you heard voices from in the immediate aftermath of the Alameda fire, as well as NPR, their partner in the FEMA aid investigation. In the introduction, you also heard the voices of OPB journalists Dirk Vanderhart, Conrad Wilson, and Jess Burns. The audio of 911 calls in Gates came to us courtesy of Ralph Bloomers. He obtained them from the agency Metcom via a public records request. Music in this episode is from Audio Network. And if you ever have a question for us, please reach out. Send us an email at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Take care of yourself. I'll catch you later.